Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I'm talking with KB Wagers about their book, The Ghosts of Trappist. Thank you so much for joining me, KB.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dakota.
So, this book is in the universe with two other books. There's two other books in the universe. Do you want to give a rundown of kind of what's happening here?
What is going on? What are these shenanigans? So the NeoG adventures are a series of standalone novels that take place in a near futuristic Earth-based setting or solar system setting. Um, Humanity has survived what is called the collapse, which, like, I'm sorry everybody, but it's happening like now. It was not, I wasn't trying to be precedent about that, but here we are. And somehow managed to get their shit together and claw themselves back into some semblance of not dying. Um, and now they have moved out into the solar system. There are habitats on Mars, and then the nearest travelable solar system via wormhole, Trappist. Um, and the stories follow a crew of interceptors who belong to the Near Earth Orbital Guard, which is essentially a space version of the US Coast Guard in some format. There's obviously, we have a lot of wiggle room. There is a lot of differential stuff in terms of rank structure and how the service itself works. But you're basically looking at sort of a ragtag bunch of raw recruits and ne'er-do-wells and retired Navy people. And so these folks fly around the solar system, save people, um, try and deal with their own issues, and also compete in a intramilitary competition called the Boarding Games, which is a series of events, cage fighting, sword fighting, hacking competitions, a big event called the Boarding Action, which is essentially sort of the same thing that they would do if they were boarding a ship out in real space. And yeah, the stories follow this singular crew, Zuma's ghost. Although in Ghosts of Trappist, we get to see some of the other interceptor crews, namely the commander Darcy Montaglione from Dread Treasure, and some of the folks from Flux Capacitor and Wandering Hunter as well.
One thing I will say, your names are great for these ships, the Flux Capacitor and Zuma's Ghost.
I had a lot of fun coming up with names. And in part, I ended up with so many names because we discovered early on that you can't just have a gaming competition that is sort of similar to the Olympics, but you have to have brackets, and you have to have names to fill those brackets, so that you know where your actual named characters are competing at any given time, so that you're not accidentally doubling up on stuff, but also so they have people to compete against. So I ended up with a relatively extensive list of both interceptor crews and the names of the ships, and then also a bunch of Navy and Marine and Air Force and Army people, because we did actual brackets for the entire games for the first book. And it turned into a bit of a project where I was like, this was not anticipated at all, but here we are. And so now I have a pretty good backlog of names to pick from.
Well, I mean, you're gonna make more books in this universe, right?
I absolutely hope so. That's
Yeah.
still in. we
Wow, you have the names already.
I'm like, we're all good to go. Like, I could write about this for a couple of years as far as characters go. And
Yeah.
that, yeah, it's been sort of fun. I think, I don't know how many people picked it up, but the everybody but one character on Wandering Hunter, for example, is named after hockey players.
I would not have gotten that.
So yeah, that's just one of the sort of like randomly fun things you can do when you're like, hey, I'm a hockey fan and I'm gonna put like all of these characters in here. I'd actually unintentionally already named the commander after a hockey player, Peter Forsberg, who used to play for the Colorado Avalanche. Um,
Okay.
and
That's pretty.
so yeah, the commander's name is Pia Forsberg, and
Um,
um, yeah, it sort of snowballed from there.
One thing that I really enjoy about the books is you have this uh so Earth is dying and there is a mass exodus, and you have these people who started off on these really hella slow ships that left, and then all of a sudden there was wormhole technology. And so they keep finding or like mentioning that these ships are out there, and there's like some that are missing. And so I love the like, oh crap, all of these people left, and then you created a wormhole.
And now we're like, hey, we can fix this. And it was one of those things where when you think about it, like technology evolves so quickly. And it's sort of a constant push and pull because space is so big. And travel is so slow, especially since we don't have the technology or the capability at the moment to solve the fuel problem for faster than light travel, which is essentially when you're talking about faster than light travel, that's what it boils down to, is the amount of fuel that is required to travel faster than the speed of light to even remotely like cross distances that are within travel range. The the um the sheer like ridiculousness of it eventually is sort of like when you write science fiction, you just have to kind of throw your hands up, be like, well, here we are, like this is what we're doing. And as long as it's consistent in world, we're good. But yeah, so I impart that because it's part of the plot for A Pale Light in the Black, which was the debut book for the NeoG. Yeah, that we had this idea that the these people would start off on what were essentially cryo-generational ships, and they were headed for Trappist. Yeah, and then most of them got picked up. Once they figured out like, oh wait, we have all these ships, so we're just gonna wormhole in and grab them and go back out. And they didn't get all of them, which is another like, yeah, space is terrifying. If you go out there, you might not come back.
Excuse me. Yeah, so I really love that. And in the Ghosts of Trappist, there's even some of this like technology is moving faster and we don't really know what's happening, it feels like. So I guess that's why Safi is probably one of my favorites, is because she's like stuck in trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah, I was excited. I mean, our plan all along has kind of been to so the characters for folks who haven't read the books, the crew of Zuma's Ghost is in the first book is made up of Commander Rosa Martine. Lieutenant Max Carmichael comes in as the new lieutenant. Um, and then Safi is Ensign Nelzika, and then we have Ma and Jenks, of course, and Tamago, and the crew shifts a little bit as the stories go on. But the plan had always kind of been Max and Jenks are like anchor characters, and they appear in all the books, and they have point of view in all the books, and then we cycled through some of the other characters. So yeah, this Ghost of Trappist seemed like a natural point to get to introduce Safi's point of view. And it was a lot of fun to write her. It was a lot of fun to get in her head because she hadn't been particularly vocal or present on the page in the first two books. She's sort of there as part of the unit, but I mean, part of it is anytime you put Jenks on the page, it's just like it's so hard to get anybody else to like and she was surprisingly cooperative in this book to like sort of tamp stuff down. And she's also evolving, and Jenks has gone through so much growth, and I love it so much. But yeah, to get to write Safi, as we're dealing with Jenks's robot dog Doge, who is going through some interesting evolutions as what should be a limited AI robot, and then some other problems that are starting to crop up. And so I got to write a lot about Safi. I got a chance to kind of write the hacking competition for the boarding games, which I hadn't had a chance to do yet. And just like a huge shout out to my friend Russ Rogers, who is like one of the like probably premier computer security information defense guys in the country, um who very very patiently, like, I kept texting him and like, hey, well, how would you do this, like, what hypothetically, if I wanted to hack into somebody's systems, what would I do?
Not that I'm going to, it's for research.
I know.
Um, so that brings up there's so many points of view that you kind of switch through. Well, not so many, but there's like four-ish in this book. So how did the points of view shifts help tell the story of Ghosts of Trappist, or even NeoG as a whole?
We this, it's been really interesting. My first two trilogies with Orbit were actually in first person. And so but the story that I wanted to tell for the NeoG, it was pretty clear that that wasn't gonna work. And it wasn't necessarily something I wanted to do anyway. So when I started writing, I just sort of started writing to see like who was going to speak up and who, where things were going to come from. Um, I am admittedly and weirdly not a huge fan of multiple POV books. And part of it is because I tend to get really frustrated if there's too much space between, like, you're in a POV and then the next chapter is a POV for somebody else who's not anywhere near the previous scene and is like, halfway across the country or in another solar system or whatever. And so for the most part, I try really hard with point of view characters to bounce kind of one after the other where the scenes connect with each other. That was a little bit trickier in Ghosts because we are dealing with, like, at one point the Zuma's ghost crew is on Earth and we have the rest of the folks back in Trappist. So I kind of had to bounce back and forth. And in that case, I just tried to look for like connecting threads to the story as a whole. So that if somebody was dealing with something back in Trappist, it either got mentioned on the page for the POV folks that were back on Earth at the same time, or the two things connected and wove themselves back together at some point down the line. I don't know that I was always successful with that, but it didn't make me angry when I was reading it, so I figured I did a good enough job.
Well, so I keep thinking, like, these stories are so multifaceted. There's just a lot going on. And if you don't have so many points of view, I think you miss out on like half of the story, right? Because I wouldn't know what was happening on Earth if we were just in Trappist. So I kind of like that. And I like that you shifted POVs in chapters instead of just this chapter is from Safi and then this chapter is Darcy.
Yeah, that I am traditionally like, I have a weird metric for chapters. Like, chapters tend to run about 10 pages for me, like on the Word doc. And I generally stick to that format pretty hard and fast because I like the way it sets the pacing. But it does mean that, yeah, like very rarely will you get a chapter that is like entirely one character because there's usually something else going on that needs to be dealt with. And I appreciate, my editor is wonderful, and he kind of lets me do like whatever I want to. So there's not a lot of structure there in terms of, no, you have three POV characters, you can't add any more, or you can't do, there is a random scene that is from Commander Vera Till's point of view, because I needed that scene in the book. I wanted the readers to know what was happening with those crews, but none of my other crews were anywhere near what was happening. So I was like, well, we're putting this completely random POV in here. I hope you enjoy. welcome to the crew of Flux Capacitor, and a little like peek into how they run. Um, and yeah, so we it's been a lot of fun to kind of get to play with that structure and figure out like what works best for telling the story.
So kind of going along with the structure idea, there in Ghosts of Trappist, there is a lot of like flashback moments intermixed with like present time. I always wonder, how do you decide where the flashbacks go? Like, how much is too much? Like, how do you get it just to the right amount? And I don't know.
Oh no, it is. Sometimes it starts off, and frequently for me, it starts off with um basically the scenes themselves. Like I'll write a lot of those scenes, because a lot of the flashback scenes in Ghosts are Doge. And they're kind of all over the place. Some of them are from Doge's point of view. Some of them are from Jenks's point of view. I think there's even one there maybe from Max's point of view. And a lot of those scenes I just kind of wrote, and then was like, what can I use? Like, is this going to work? And then I had to kind of sit down and look at the story as a whole, and the scenes got put as close as I could to sections where the flashback itself actually tied back into whatever was about to happen in that scene. I've done something similar. We'll see the new book that's coming hopefully next year has interstitials that come in the form of news reports. And I've done sort of the same thing, where the news reports are pretty important, like touchstones for whatever is happening, like that follows the interstitial. So yeah.
So don't skip those in the next book, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you'll miss stuff.
I remember reading George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo, and he has all these like news clippings, and I got so tired after like the third one, and I was just like, I'm not reading these anymore.
I did try and keep it limited. I can't think off the top of my head, but I think there are less than a dozen. And the structure for this last NeoG book, as it stands, it's the last one, is markedly different from the previous ones. So the chapters are much longer. The timeline is way shorter, and it's everything's a little bit wild. So so there's not a ton to slog through, but what there is important.
See, if I just know that it's important, then I will read it.
They're also all very short. Like it's like it's sort of like the little piece of news that you see in social media, like the headline, and then 2 or 3 lines or whatever that are sort of leading into the story, but they give you the important information.
So in Ghosts of Trappist, one of my favorite things is when they're starting up in the beginning, and all the lines of code are going through. And I was like, this is magical. I have no idea what it means, but it's beautiful on the page.
That was a lot of fun. I had to Google a whole bunch of what is bio, what do bios startups look like, and how could you adjust that to like make, make stuff, yeah, how would you do it if you were booting up a robot dog, for example?
It looks beautiful and I love it. So like I'm sure I'll love those news clippings too. Cause like, I don't know. I love the way that your book is like your books are formatted. They just look so nice.
They have done, yeah, Harper has done a phenomenal job with the formatting on those, and with the interstitials were sort of a weird unintentional thing that kind of popped up in the first book, I think, a couple of times, and then I used them relatively heavily in Hold Fast Through the Fire because they were like the bad guys' point of views. And then we just sort of continued to use them because they are actually pretty handy for information that you want the reader to know, but you don't necessarily want to devote like an entire scene between characters, and it's sometimes that's just not, you can have Safi and Jenks reminiscing about when they booted Doge up, but it's not quite the same as having like the actual moment that he was booted up happen on page.
Well, also it gives Doge so much personality in a page and a half. And like that's beautiful because now it's set up all of these other moments with Doge, which is great.
Yeah, oh, everybody loves Doge.
How could you not? You named him Doge.
I know. That was so funny. Doge was sort of a one-off in the first book. And as you learn really quickly, like anytime you put an animal, be it robotic or real, into a book, you suddenly have an entire other character that you not only have to sort of keep track of when things are happening, but if you make them sentient like Doge is, then you suddenly have to account for everything else, as a character in his own right. And that's, yeah, and then he busted out a couple of things and Hold Fast Through the Fire where I was like, buddy, what are you doing? Like, where is this coming from? And next thing we know, I was like, oh, you're a whole other book. That's what we're doing here.
It just he grew and grew and grew. I always worry that too, though, like when people put these little like kind of throwaway characters in that are like supposed to be animals or dogs or like just pets of the crew, like so many people will love them and they need more page time.
And then I mean, I have a reputation for killing off characters with wild abandon. And,
Yeah, me too.
boy, let me tell you the number of people who were like, if anything happens to Doge, I am going to come and burn your house down. Like, I mean, nobody actually threatened that, but I was like, no, Doge is fine. Doge will be fine.
Well, so Doge is like really good comedy relief in parts, but a lot of the book is heavy. Like there's a lot of emotional trauma that these characters are like sifting through, and it's just so hard sometimes. I'm like, Safi, you should be happy. Don't be sad.
You're supposed to be happy. I know. And it is, um, it was sort of the unintentional consequences of Hold Fast Through the Fire being as hard as it was. Um, which it sort of it I mean, A Pale Light in the Black was this weird breath of fresh air where it was so much fun, and it was, you had a little bit. Max was struggling with her family issues and trying to figure out how to fit in, and all of that. But on the whole, the book is much lighter in tone. And I talk about this almost every time I talk about it, but I wrote A Pale Light in the Black almost immediately after I turned in Down Among the Dead, which is the second book in the Iridian War series, which is a truly like terrible, brutal, difficult book to read. Anytime somebody's like, hey, I'm about to start reading your the second book in the Iridian War, I always feel like I need to apologize ahead of time. Like, terribly sorry for that book because it was difficult to write. It was necessary for the series, but it Hale goes through a lot in that book. And then I got to write A Pale Light in the Black, which was just hilarious and fun and all of that. But yeah, and then we segued into Hold Fast Through the Fire, which sort of unintentionally turned into massive trauma. And the Ghosts of Trappist is very much, it's not a continuation of the trauma, but it is these characters dealing with the aftermath of the events of Hold Fast Through the Fire, which I I have a extreme pet peeve with authors putting characters through terrible events and then nothing happens afterwards. There's no conversation about it. Everybody's fine. They all go on with their merry lives and and it's never spoken of again. And I'm like, that's not how life works. Like when you live through, like say the collective trauma of a global pandemic, the effects of it are sort of indelibly marked on you forever. And so if you're learning how to live post trauma, one of those things is sort of learning how to both acknowledge your trauma and live with your trauma, because you don't get over your trauma, you don't move past your trauma, you just learn how to carry it with everything else that you're carrying. And sometimes it's really heavy, and sometimes you need help to do it, and that is a lot of Darcy's character arc in this. Like, bless that man, he showed up as like sort of a side character that became immediately super interesting, and then I did horrible things to him. And and then in Ghosts, yeah, he's so clearly struggling with how to be a commander again on the heels of this sort of terrible betrayal that happened in Hold Fast, and how to be a commander when you are so terrified that your crew is going to get hurt that you're not allowing them to do their jobs. And it was very helpful to bring Emil in, as somebody from his past and somebody who is absolutely not going to put up with his shit. Like, she had zero patience from the minute she showed up about like how this was going to work. And I was like, oh, thank goodness you're here. We're fine. This will be fine.
Well, I love that Darcy throughout most of the book is like really, really struggling. But there are people who are like, dude, you're struggling. Let us help. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not that bad.
Fine. I am totally fine. Yeah, and I mean, I like writing friendships between men, because I think that we see so little of that on the page, especially in military science fiction. Um, there's a lot of backslapping and no, I'm fine, bro, it's fine. And to have some moments where like between him and Stefan and between him and Nika, where they're like, you are so obviously not fine and we need to talk about this. Yeah, and it takes him a while to pull his head out of his ass, but we get there eventually.
There's one clap back at one point. I don't know when it is in the book, but he's talking to someone and they're like, oh, if you ever need to talk, I'm here for you. And he's like, yeah, so's my therapist. And you're like, whoa, bro.
I'm pretty sure that was early. I think it's with Stefan, like pretty
Oh,
damn close to the beginning.
I bet
Yeah.
it is. Because I
Yeah.
think he's still on Earth. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, they might be. Yeah. But yeah, either way, I was like, nah, I started to this. I was like, dude, okay, fine, we'll roll with that. And Stefan, of course, is just like whatever, because their history is fascinating and sort of contentious, and they have it's a very unique friendship, considering that they realistically should sort of hate each other, considering they were like on separate sides of a war.
Yeah, but even Jenks and Max, they have a really good relationship, right? Max Carmichael. right? That's
Yeah.
who I'm thinking of. Oh my God.
Yeah. No, it's fine. There are so many. Sometimes I'm like, wait, who are we talking about?
So
I don't
like Carmichael comes from this like really wealthy background that's kind of like destroying opportunities and like you cannot do this. And then Jenks is like the joker of their group. And yet they're such good friends and like they always have each other's backs and it's wonderful.
it. Max and Jenks's relationship is hands down like one of my favorite things, and it was a partial deliberate choice, you know, when I mean they meet in A Pale Light in the Black, and um I didn't want to do the conventional like these two women hate each other because Max is taking Jenks's brother's place on the team, and um I was like, Jenks is going to have a problem with this. Like, I knew that straight off. Like, this is an issue. She doesn't do feelings very well. She's not very trusting. She especially doesn't like rich people, and she doesn't like authority. Um, and for the most part, Zuma's ghost has managed to function like still as a cohesive unit because Jenks has come a long way and learned how to trust the people in her team. But when you drop a bomb in the middle of that and like throw, you know, new people in, then it's this whole new adjustment. But those two were such a, it was just so fun. And it continues to be fun to write the evolution of their relationship, um, how much they like deeply platonically love each other, and how like they are, you know, two pieces of a whole that also exist like sort of on their own, obviously. And they do such a good job sort of completing each other and being there for each other. um and it's like if you put the two of these together, like nothing, like you can't, nothing else is going to survive. You know. um and so it's, yeah, like I absolutely love, um I love their relationship. I love how it has evolved. Um a lot of the a lot of Max's um issues with her parents come up in Ghosts of Trappist. It's they are still continually, you know, they weren't happy about her joining the NeoG. They continue to not be happy. You get to see, like, every time I was writing stuff, I was like, God, her family is terrible. Like, why am I, why did I create this absolutely terrible family? Um, and she still struggles a lot with like her, you know, her insecurity and her tendency to second guess herself, which is another thing that I really I really dislike long running books. You don't want to hit the same points over and over again, right? In a story beat. Like you're not trying to kind of hammer stuff away. But the truth of the matter is, it's not like people, you know, figure out that their family is terrible and that they need to stand on their own and then they're fine in perpetuity after that. Like, this is a continual evolution of learning how to stand on your own, and sometimes we revisit the same damn issues over and over and over again. um and so that was very fascinating. And the culmination, Max is extremely concerned about the fact that she and Jenks are what looks to be headed for like a showdown in the cage matches, because they both compete and they both fight really well, and up until this point have managed to not end up going head to head in the championship match. And it's a concern for Max because her whole life has revolved around being competitive with people who like take that to the extreme, and if you beat them they will not be happy about it. So that's all she has to go on, despite the last couple of years, you know, which isn't enough to like get past that fear and that concern. And that was a lot. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed getting to like you know, put those two together even more. And then the fight scene when it does happen in the boarding games, the uh is actually both of their points of view, like at the same time. There is no like formal delineation between whose head we're in during that fight. And I wrote it a couple of different ways, and that one worked out the best. And I was really pleased with the result, because I thought that it did a good job, both like structurally and thematically, of kind of showing like how these two people uh, both work together and compete against each other.
Um, I love that in this universe you do let characters leave, or you murder them, awfully, whichever, retire, murder, whatever.
So they just go to a farm somewhere. It's fine.
But I love that because it does feel like a real military service where people are just coming in and out all the time. And I feel like a lot of other military sci-fi doesn't let that happen because we get so attached to characters.
Yeah, and it is tricky. They definitively do not move nearly as much as like real world military people do, because in part, like my history being like military adjacent, that was probably one of the more annoying things to see from the outside, is like how do you possibly build a fucking cohesive team here when you're moving people every 2 years? Like, how are people supposed to get to know each other and spend time together and learn how to function as a unit? Like, nobody else does that, right? Like firehouses don't randomly move their firemen like back and forth, and they're like, no. So I made a decision pretty early on that I was like, no, these crews are gonna stay together for like years, because we're out in space and anything terrible can happen, will and usually does.
Yeah.
And I would much rather like not have new characters moving in every 2 years. However, yeah, we did like I had some pretty clear plans from the get-go, to move characters kind of back and forth, and through sort of through the stage, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like we see some people kind of float back and forth, and I never could really. I kind of wanted to bring. Somebody had just asked me this, like there had been plans to bring like Ma back, um, for the stuff with Max and her family in Ghosts. And I was like, you know what? I just couldn't. Like I couldn't, there was no way to really make it work. He sort of did, as much as I loved Ma as a character, I couldn't, once I decided that he was like definitively going to retire and leave at the end of A Pale Light in the Black, I couldn't. The only time I'd bring him back briefly in Hold Fast, but other than that, I couldn't make that work in the story. No, with hope, everybody can cross their fingers. But if I talk Harper Voyager into buying more books, we will get to see Ma. We will get to see Ma having to deal with like new janks, which will be hilarious.
That would be interesting. I wonder if Jenks would devolve a little, go
Oh,
back to their past relationship habits.
I no, and it will be, because it will be like pre A Pale Light in the Black janks. So it will be like barely in control, like I was a spacer 2 seconds ago and I've already been busted like 4 times. Like that is also for the people who were mad that there were no bar fights in this book. I'm sorry, I'm gonna make it up to you if I get the chance, because we just couldn't write any bar fights. I couldn't seem to make it like couldn't seem to make it work. At no point did we end up in a bar in this book.
You couldn't make it work with the games and the mystery and the emotional trauma and Doge and
just throw a bar fight in there for the heck of it.
I mean, I think you could have gotten Darcy over some of his emotional constipation,
It's entirely possible.
Oh gosh. So one thing that I find really interesting is there's like really intense stuff happening in the world, like in the universe, with them finding like ships going missing in Ghosts of Trappist, and then ships coming back that shouldn't necessarily be coming back. um, and and then you throw in the games. And I feel like it's such a like funny dichotomy of like we're really like into just fighting with each other inner service wise, and then like there's real shit we got to do though. Like maybe put it on hold for a minute.
Yeah. We're sort of constantly like I love the games, and it's hilarious because people will frequently be like, this book is great, it has everything, like family trauma and polyamorous relationships and hilarious jokes and sports. And I'm like, I know, I was surprised as everybody else. We when I got approached about writing this world and creating it, like the boarding games was one of the like tent poles for this. So it's been really interesting and in some ways a challenge to figure out how to write like something like relatively dramatic and sort of scary in the form of ships going missing and ghost spaceships, which regular ghost ships are kind of creepy enough, but ghost spaceships I feel like are a whole other level of creep. Just showing back up in port in Trappist. And then sort of the more lighter side of things where the crew of Zuma's Ghost is out competing and getting to kind of have a break in the sense of like they're not doing their daily job. And it worked out really well in this particular case because we did have like Darcy's crew, who obviously was not going to be in a position to compete in the games, despite the fact that they had previously because of the events of Hold Fast Through the Fire. And it, it gave us a chance to sort of do that split and have this focus where we're like, on the one hand, back in Trappist, shit's getting real. And on the other hand, we're here we are at the preliminaries where Jenks is mouthing off to somebody who doesn't quite understand that he maybe shouldn't respond, or maybe you should pay better attention because if Jenks is mouthing off, she's probably about to beat you.
Yeah, but it'll be funny. So it feels very like real world though. Like I don't know, we live right next to a Coast Guard station. Well, not right next to it, but like there's a Coast Guard station here, and they regularly go out on these like rescue missions because we live on Lake Superior and people do stupid stuff and stuff happens on Lake Superior. Just does. So there's like these really intense moments where they're going out trying to find people, rescuing people in storms, and then they come back and they're all like drunk at their bunkhouse, and you're like, oh yeah, this seems normal.
This is how we decompress from this. Yeah. You know what it is? I've had a lot of people. It's always really funny because I have never been in the military. I've never served in the military. But I have been military adjacent for a good chunk of my life. So I've seen a lot of this interaction between people. But I frequently get like responses or commentary from people who are like astonished to find out that I've never actually been in the military because I apparently nail that type of like atmosphere so well in terms of and I just feel like it's one of those things where you recognize that people who are doing things that are like, sort of above and beyond an everyday uh, like what we would consider everyday is the associations with each other, then they tend to be pretty tight bonds, and people tend to, find ways to decompress after those sorts of things happen. I think that also happens, like among night stalkers at grocery stores and like
Different kind of battling. Okay.
right, like there's it's a different level, but it's sort of the same thing. Like, and it's and you like the associations that you have with people in your life, especially around your job, are often like the people you spend the most time with. So they're the people that you know really well, whether you want to or not. um, and also sometimes the people that you hang out with and see sort of off the clock. So and obviously like when you're in space, that the whole dynamic changes a little bit more because you're like you're trapped on Jupiter Station or stuck in a ship for several weeks at a time.
Yeah, I would probably go crazy being stuck in a ship with like 10 people at a time. Like, that's not enough people for me to avoid nine of you.
Yeah, no. I'm like, barring even the claustrophobia part of it, where I'm like, the minute you close that door, I have a problem. The I feel like it really does take a special kind of person to want to, go into space and stay in space, like the folks on the ISS for a long, long period of time. Um,
I feel the same way about like submarine crews. Like, I would not in a
yeah,
million years.
absolutely not. Yeah.
So I love that all of this kind of like gets put in the book in different ways. So I think you did like a really great job with layering world building and like characterizations, but you did it so quickly because there is a bunch of point of view shifts that I love. So,
It's good.
um, are you working on anything else right now?
So right now I'm waiting on edits for what will be the fourth NeoG book, which at the moment is tentatively titled "And the Mighty Will Fall." Um, my my
Ominous.
my I know my books are sounding more and more like Fallout Boy song titles somehow. I'm not really sure like where we're going with that, but it it is a little ominous. It all I can say about it is Die Hard in space. Um and um the the Zuma's Ghost crew member playing John McClane is not who you think it is.
Oh, come on. It's gotta be
I know.
true.
It is not the predictable. It is not the predictable one. I'm excited about it though. I think that it was a very challenging book to write. Like I mentioned earlier, it is significantly different in structure and tone. And I was just also struggling with burnout, and I had just moved, and it took me a really long time to kind of be able to settle back into the groove. Ghosts of Trappist I wrote in like 3 months, and I just banged it out. And it was so easy. It was very weird. This one, Fall took so much longer, and it was actually the first book out of 9 books where I was like, I'm not going to hit my deadline. I need more time on this. It's like I
It
realized,
happens, though. I
yeah,
mean,
it was just a lot. Um, and so yeah, we I I have written some pitches for new NeoG books, which I need to sit down with my editor and do what beg and plead and be like, please people buy my books so that I can write more books. Uh,
oh,
and I'm also I have been working with my agent on a brand new space opera that is it's sort of it's a little bit cyborg, a little bit fantasy bent, a lot of discussion about what happens when you get trapped in your own body and can't find a way out, um, and all sort of loosely influenced by a poem by Christina Rossetti called "The Goblin Market." Which is one of my favorite poems, which is about two sisters who one of them eats from the goblin market and then promptly falls ill and can't see the market anymore. And her other sister seeks out the market in order to save her life. So I'm excited if we can ever. God, I hate outlines so much. It's just, yeah, I have such a hard time. Like, wait, you want me to tell you the whole story in an outline before I actually write it? Because if I do that, I'm not going to want to write this book like after we get done. But
so I think it was Alfred Hitchcock who outlined his movies so thoroughly that by the time he got to filming them, he said he didn't want to do it anymore because he'd already done it in his head so well, and he was just done.
And I infinitely tend to have the same problem. And I, again, bless my editor, because my outlines for my books are frequently things that I like throw out, and then the finished product of the book is only like 30% of what got like the outline, because I just start writing and I'm like, oh, I had an outline, I should check and see like what's going on. Maybe am I close? No, I'm not close at all. So I I have to frequently apologize to the marketing department and fix things on the back end where I'm like, no, this is completely not even close to what we were talking about. I'm sorry. And so yeah, it's kind of a struggle for me in that same fashion where my brain is like, oh, we've done this, like we're done. We don't need to do this anymore. And
I know the story. Why do you want me to tell it again? What?
yeah. However, publishers don't buy books on trust me, it'll be good. So here we are.
I do know some people who, so I went to school for writing, and I knew some fiction authors who would write scenes on note cards, like outline scenes, and like do their whole book this way before writing a full like page. And I was like, what are you doing, you crazy person?
I know some people, I one of my really good friends outlines theirs in Excel, like chapter by chapter, like all the beats, and I don't, yeah, and I'm like, that is horrifying. But if it works for you, go at it. Like nobody writes a book the same way, and I've sort of settled into this, like, no, this works for me, so I'll keep doing it. And in the meantime, there's just a lot of back and forth with my agent where he's like, did you mean to say this? And I'm like, no, that's not at all what I meant to say. Like,
No,
okay, crap. Like, hey, give me 3 more days and let me think about this, because apparently what is in my head and what I wrote on paper is not the same thing.
I think I would fall into the trap because you have so many characters that they would all just end up sounding the same. If I had to plot it all out, I'd be like, oh, and then this happens. And they would all just be monotone.
Right? Like and that's a lot of my characters. Like I sort of discover like what the voices are, and what they do as I write the book. That's I went in pretty early thinking, I knew who Jenks was. I knew how she was going to react to stuff, and what she was going to do. And I knew about Max, but then yeah, everybody else, you're sort of like, oh, we need to like make this person alive and distinct. And yeah, that's like, yeah, not everybody can wink at each other. You have to like break that down. that's that's always my big like. I was very pleased when I finished Ghosts of Trappist, and I was like, there are only 6 instances of wink in here, and 4 of them belong to Jinx. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Oof. Cracked the code on that one.
You just have to like control F and wink, and you just delete that. Just delete.
There's a lot. After I get done with a draft, there is usually like a chunk of time before I send it to my editor where I will actually like actively go through and look for those words where you're like, because I know he's going to say something, so I may as well just do it now and like figure out. Because when you're writing in the moment, a lot of times it's just you're looking for that, like you're really just typing away. And I was just talking to it was Valerie Valdez, and I had a conversation for Old Firehouse Books a couple of weeks ago, and that like where you where your brain gets like fixated on some like super complex word, and then next thing you know, you've used it 8 times in 4 pages, and you're like, oh god, okay, I have to go back and fix all this because nobody talks like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The revision life. That's where it is.
Yeah, books don't get that first draft is terrible. Don't let anybody ever tell you differently. Like nobody writes a clean first draft. I don't care who they are.
And if they do, they're bonkers, and I don't trust them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, KB, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And if anybody out there hasn't seen the NeoG books or purchased them, this is your time. Ghosts of Trappist is pretty friggin' great, and it's fun. Got Doge Dog a lot in it, so gotta do it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you like robot dogs and snarky shenanigans and, well, and trauma, like
sad.
That was so much trauma. Sorry, folks.
Well, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.